All right, we're live.
All right, hey there.
Well, I'm here with Robert Schindler. He's been a longtime viewer and a mutual friend of ours. Robert Berry said, you know, you should talk with him. And so got in touch with him, and here he is.
Here I am.
With
What do you
his-
want?
And with his little small keyboard rig. Make lots of music on those. And he has right here. Latest one. This one has a DVD on it.
Yeah, the DVD has the album in 2496 high res. That's solo acoustic piano.
And you said you've been in the music business for maybe a couple of years, right?
Well, yeah, I've been in the music business a long time. I started, I guess, when I was, as soon as I guess when I was about 16 years old, 17 years old, I was in Jersey, bands, living in North Jersey, playing in clubs and, doing covers and stuff, and then started to get into original music. Wow, just wound up putting a band together way back when for Ruth Copeland. Anybody who knows who that might be, she was the singer from England, was with Parliament Funkadelic for a while. And then we did a bunch of touring, backing her up. I played with Johnny Nash, with T-Bone Walker, a lot of people, different bands way back when. And I guess the first band that, that was really, that I was involved with was a group called Mason, Mason. And we were struggling, we had a great manager, Ron Herbert, who was able to do some finagling, and we wound up doing demos at Electric Lady Studios in New York with Ralph Moss. And then those demos were liked by Bearsville Records. So they hooked us up at Bearsville Studios with John Holbrook. At the time, that was he was Todd's engineer at the time, and so we did those demos, and then it turned out that we were going to do that. Bearsville signed us. We were going to do an album, and they decided instead of using the main studio, we were going to use the barn down at the Bearsville barn, and we were actually the first act that we brought Eddie Offord over from England with his mobile recording studio and set up there and did the album with Eddie. And boy, that can go on for hours just on this topic alone. But Eddie was, if anybody doesn't know who Eddie Offord is, he produced early Yes and Emerson Lake and Palmer albums and Dave Edmunds and all kinds of stuff. He was quite an engineer, and he was quite a character. He never got to finish the project. He sort of overdid certain things in his personal life, and Todd came in and mixed it at the end, and it sort of just never took off. It never happened, the whole project. So it was and then later on, some of those same members formed a group called The States, and we did 2 albums. The first album was on Crystals Records. The second album was on Boardwalk Records, and we toured with Hall & Oates on the Ecstatic Tour. We were the opening act everywhere in the U.S. That was a lot of fun. And then also after that fell apart. I managed Electric Lady Studios in New York for a while, and sort of drifted out of the music business for quite some time. Actually got into home audio video, which actually I still do, but that's sort of like brought me up to, after getting married and kids and everything, sort of starting to play again, uh, and started to put music together again. And then things like MySpace happened, you know.
Yes, I remember that.
And then people started going, oh, that's cool, I like that. And then there was like DJs going, hey, can you be on my show? And then it just kept developing into Facebook, and meeting more people, getting to know all the great DJs on House of Prague that started to like my music and play my music. And I have my music attorney is Ron Beanstalk, who is actually he's an amazing music attorney, but he's also an amazing bass player. He's the bass player for Rich Shohanna's Flying Greens. Rich is the current guitar player and singer in Nectar now. And Ron represents Dream Theater and Stephen Wilson, and I can go on and on. Deep Purple. So he got me and his band signed. We started Trans Global Records, which is distributed through the Orchard, Sony, and so that's where my albums have been coming out on, and going on all the streaming services. And through all these connections, people have asked me to record with them. That's how I wound up playing keyboards on the Tony Romero's Vortex album. That's on Melodic Revolution Records. And people have just, send me stuff to play on all the time, and I just keep doing my own music. And it's great. I mean, I'm going to be 70 years old, believe it or not, in August. And I'd love, I'm just having a great time.
I think it's amazing, how you look back into, over the years, and it's like you think, being, for me, 55, it's like it's just so weird, but in my mind I'm still young, and it sounds like you are too, with all the oh, we're getting some major feedback here. I'm not sure why it's happening.
I'm not hearing anything. I'm fine here.
Oh wow, because I'm hearing some of the stuff. It's just kind of getting that back. Okay, well, it's just in my ears then.
Yeah, and this year, well, obviously, other connections sort of happened that was sort of by chance as well. I was on the Cruise to the Edge, and I see this guy sitting at a table wearing a Circuline T-shirt. If you know who Circuline is, they're a phenomenal band. Andrew Collier, the keyboard player, is like, they're all amazing. And I walked, up to him and say, hey, I said, we have something in common. And I said, I love that band. And he goes, well, what is that? I said, well, we have the same music attorney, and which was, Ron represented Circuline at that time as well. And, we got to be talking and friends on the cruise. And then of course, Tom is, Tom Poneri, and started Prague Stock. So when Prague Stock was going to happen in October, and I live in North Carolina, Charlotte area, and, it's up in Jersey. I contacted him and said, I want to pay for tickets, but I want to get really good seats. And he goes, no, you're working. So basically he made me, keyboard, one of the keyboard techs. So I didn't perform that year, but that was my first involvement. So I was there working my butt off for the first Prague Stock. And then the second Prague Stock, it was great. I got to play in between a couple of the acts one night, And that was a lot. That was the first time I had performed. I can't even think how many years it had been since I performed in front of people. So that was great. And then the following year, I it was this is a sort of a fun story. I'll go back and I'll continue where I was, but I was going to a concert in December a few years back in Asheville. It was to see Stephen Wilson, and before the show, I stopped off to the Museum, which was at the time being built. It was only like the little front area. The back wasn't there, and Michelle was there, and Bob Moog's personal piano was up in the front at the time. So I asked Michelle if I could play it, and she said yes. And she was like, really impressed, and she filmed me and everything, playing the piano a bit. And we became, talking and stuff. And as the museum opened, I'm only a couple hours from there. I was there for the opening weekend, and we became friends. And then I got her involved with Prague Stock. So the next Prague Stock, we had what's called Moog in the Park. And so basically, at the park across the street, I set up my keyboard rig and performed. There was a Moog out there, and my keyboards and everything, and that was great. And then other performers would come up and or jam or perform. I let them do whatever they wanted. We play together, and I'm sitting, I'm playing along, and here comes Eric Norlander, and we played together for probably about a half hour. That was amazing. And then of course last year Prague Stock was virtual.
Right. Yeah.
So I did a virtual show for that, and then of course we did because of the Moog thing, we did Movember, so I did another performance, and of course I donate all my performances and stuff to the Bob Moog Foundation, which today is a double birthday. It's Bob Moog's birthday in remembrance. So it's also my son's birthday today too. So happy birthday, Austin! And then this year now it's Prague Stock is back on again in October.
Yeah, yeah, I saw that. I saw the dates for that.
Yeah. So I will be there. They're putting me in charge of the park, and I'll Moog in the Park's gonna live again this year. And next year I was asked to perform at Rosfest.
Oh, that's cool.
So I'll be at Rosfest next year in April, I believe it is, and I'm going to be music director of, well, I guess it's called the Beer Garden. There's going to be like 5 acts total, and I'll be performing there, and I'll be in charge of getting all that going and set up for all the acts and everything as well. That are going to be, it's not the main stage, but it's this other section that they're going to have acts playing.
That's cool. That's cool. Are you gonna? Are you gonna be a solo?
Yeah, I do my thing solo. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you got enough stuff there too. You don't really need anybody else.
Yeah, I can get enough noise going.
Yeah. Because I was listening to just the differences between the first one that I put on to listen to was this one. And then afterwards, kind of just a big difference between, this one had almost like a full band sound, and this one just
that's just solo piano, period. That's just playing. So.
And that was that one right there. I was just noticing that has a 2021 release date, but then on the last songs number 9, story 9 2020. So I guess that was your ode to 2020.
Yeah, that was like something a little on the crazy side. That was like, okay, this has been a crazy year, and I think
right.
The last note is like a little just smash on the piano.
Right. Yeah, that's it was like a perfect. For me, it was like a perfect sum up of what, if someone wanted to know musically what 2020 was all about, it's just like a nice crash on the arm on the keyboard. You know, it's like because it's like I spoke to a few people when the lockdown first happened that they thought, you know, they were told, okay, it's going to be a few weeks and then we'll be back, you know, into the studio to finish up the rest of what we were doing. And it didn't turn out that way. I think
Rose up on me.
and you know, what's funny is like it's weird how some bands and artists completely put their music on hold, and how others took advantage of that. Okay, now we can't do any touring, so why not go into the studio and, you know, work on music and get it out, and, you know, to make sure that, you know, the listeners out there still have something to listen to, you know, something brand new. And you know, I'm going to be talking with one band that they're putting out two stuff this year, you know, two CDs. So it's like they've been working a lot in their studio. So it's like um I I couldn't imagine as a musician, you know, especially if you're a touring musician, you know, that you put out your music on CD and then you go out to support it. And I couldn't imagine how someone put out their music and then all of a sudden it's like, you know, sorry guys, you know, we got this pandemic happening and you can't go out there. And it's like, and it's, you know, it's almost like you know, you're so excited, you know, to go out there and then all of a sudden your hopes are just dashed. And it's like, you know, I see people from on my side of the thing, you know, that like to go out to concerts and and little shows that all of a sudden now they can't go and see their favorite artist. So it's like I'm just hoping, really hoping that all, you know, I know with Ross Fest and Cruise to the Edge are being scheduled for next year, but I think all the stuff that's happening this year, that, you know, little things here and there, I'm hoping they're not jumping the gun, you know, because I would hate for it all of a sudden be right back to a lockdown because everybody's over anxious.
Well, it looks like the way Prague Stock's going to be, it's going to be a smaller event. You know, it's not using the main theater, it's using the Hamilton Hall, which is smaller. They're going to have less people. The people who attend that are going to have to be vaccinated.
Right.
And of course, it's also going to be streamed as well. So,
Oh, that's good.
which is because we got that down last year. That was, you know, how to make that all happen. So it'll be a nice combination and of being able to be there, you know, the people who can be there in person and or anybody anywhere. So
Right. Well, you know, I think like I said many times, I think virtual concerts can be a very big plus to get audiences that maybe can't travel. You know, if let's just put aside the pandemic thing. Someone that's you know, halfway across the world that really wants to come Prague Stock or Ross Fest or, you know, Cruise to the Edge or any of those things, or even smaller shows, and they can't afford travel. They can't afford to, you know, I see the cost of the hotels. You know, they're I hate saying it, but they really gouge. You know, and it's like you're only there. You know, when you get a hotel room and you're going to a concert or, you know, a festival of some sort, you're not really utilizing your hotel. So you're basically it's an overpriced storage center for you.
yeah, well,
So
that's why, you know, Prague Stock and Rossfest, you know, they go out there and they negotiate deals
right.
with the, you know, with the hotels for, you know, to get a better rate for people.
Oh yeah, and also too, when I went to Rossfest 2012, I had a roommate, and I believe, and I forgot his name, and he's probably pretty upset, but the keyboard player from Kinetic Element.
Oh, yeah, Mike. Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, I think he was my roommate, because we took
Mike.
the class
Yeah,
right
Mike's
down the,
he's one of the people who jammed with me too at Prague Stock.
yeah, so it's like, I mean, that's the other alternative is, get a roommate, split the cost. And I'm hoping, for me personally, with my health issues, that I don't see myself getting back into long distance kind of concert going or festival going for another, probably 2023 at the earliest. So I'm hoping that whatever festivals are still going at that time, that get some good choices of bands, because like I said, I'm still kind of afraid that the stuff that's happening, the summer show, I'm not, Proxoc, that's in October, but summer shows that people are doing, I'm really hoping that they're going to follow the lead of, like what you're saying is, you got to get in, if you come in to it, you got to, be vaccinated, and then we're going to have, less people in the audience, so it, don't, for that reason too,
I think it's, I think, Prague Stock this year is, is I think doing it smart. They're taking, it's baby steps. And I mean, the way the plan looks, it should be, everything should go great.
yeah, I keep on joking with people about up here in Maine that it seems to be a wasteland when it comes to our kind of music.
Yeah.
No one, at least since I lived here, no one comes up. I think the furthest north any prog band comes is in the Massachusetts area, but nothing. Maybe even New Hampshire, but not so much up in Maine, and
Yeah.
So it's like it makes it difficult for me to go to see a show because closest one could be like 4 or 5 hours away, driving,
Yeah.
and then ever since a few years back that Rossfest moved from Pennsylvania down to Florida,
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that there a lot of the festivals, when I was living out in California, you had Prog Fest, and they the first one was at UCLA, and then they went to this one place called the Variety Arts Center. They did that for a few years until Prog Fest moved for 1 year in 1999, went up to the Bay Area, and then it came back the following year, and it was at this hall downtown LA again. And it's like, I think a lot of those festivals, they got to negotiate with venues, and then sometimes could be sometimes the venues see, oh, look at all these people here, next year let's jack up the price.
Yeah. I mean, we get some stuff around here between Charlotte, Raleigh, and Asheville, and I'll go to Atlanta, which is about 4.5 hours from here, for certain people, obviously, but it's not like, you probably get a little, obviously less than we get in this area. But there's like, bands that I love from overseas. Like, I mean, I love Nightwish and Within Temptation. Now, Nightwish played Charlotte once, which was phenomenal to be able to see them. But like, but now if they come over, they play like, two big major cities like, New York or LA, and then they're gone. They just,
Exactly.
yeah, they can't afford, it's just too expensive to tour. When you think about all the equipment and the personnel and the crew and food and hotels, and I mean, it's just, the cost is nuts, to pull that off anymore. So,
Yeah, and especially a keyboard player such as yourself with all that you have, you
well,
know.
most, I'm a little old school here, so it's like I don't record on a computer. The only computer that I use in the studio is I have a Rolly Seaboard, and I use it for my Seaboard sounds, because all my other keyboards, I use the internal sounds built in. And I record on this Tascam machine over here that basically it's like old school, because, I used to manage Electric Lake Studios, and I grew up with Neve and Studer, and, the old fashioned way of recording. I lay down a track and then I play over it. I can't do this, computer stuff where I can take this phrase and put it over here and move this here and do that. I can't do any of that. I have to,
Right.
I have to actually play it and do it, and each part. So, on some of my recordings, I'm more involved in the feel and the emotion of it. And if there's a bad note sometimes in there, it's like, it's there,
Right.
it's just, I'm not going to change it because I really like the way, everything else felt. So, and the same thing with, most keyboard players now, they've got like, laptops with sounds and all this stuff, and they only really need a couple keyboards, and they can, do all this stuff, and,
Right.
and so I'm like a dinosaur, here. So, if I actually had to tour with a band, I would have to do something similar to that. There's no way that, unless you're some, huge band, that can afford, to carry that much gear around.
Right.
It's
Well,
like, it's tough.
Well, it's like sometimes I kind of think the modern way is almost like it's cheating, because if you make, like you were saying, you make a mistake, your way is like it's there. But with someone that's doing the recordings completely digital, they can
Yeah.
cut that part out and put the right part in, and it's like I you know I like yourself feel like I'm old school. I mean, granted, I do listen to a lot of music nowadays in my car with one of these.
Right. Yeah. Well,
So it's like,
you don't have choice in a new car. They don't have CD players anymore.
well, mine actually does have a CD player, but to carry a stack of like 8 or 10 CDs, it's more of an inconvenience. But I know people that are, that all they do is they get their music digitally, and it's like, no, it's like, whenever I tell people, it's like, I love to get CDs. I always like to show them what I got, and it's like, to me, it's very important to hold a physical copy of the CD
Yeah.
I never got into collecting vinyl.
Mhm.
The only reason is back when I did get some, um, I was, I, I scratched a few things and I put, had too much fingerprints on it. So I was always afraid of that. So and then the cassette, I needed the rewinding, thing. So I was like when CDs came out, I was like going, now there's the format for me. I mean, perfect, you know, and, I love that people are very passionate about collecting vinyl, especially now with where past, what is that, 5 or almost 10 years, that resurgence, where new bands putting out vinyl, and then
Yeah.
I like the passion behind it, but it's like, I barely got enough room for this.
I understand. I've got, obviously, at my age growing up, that was, we had vinyl. That's what we had. And then cassettes, and 8 tracks and that stuff sort of happened. And obviously I got into cassette, only when it was like, I think JVC or somebody, they came out with a cassette deck that you could like actually program and skip tracks. So if you just wanted to go to one song, you can go, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it would scan and find the breaks and go to that song. Because I like being able to put just, if I want to play one song on a record, just be able to drop the needle on that song.
Oh
And then,
yeah.
of course, CDs came out, and there was that big battle because the first CD players, they were like $1,000, and they were really harsh. They didn't sound that great
Right.
compared to vinyl. But of course, then digital technology got better and better and better. And then, we can get into a whole year of conversation now what's going on with streaming. Obviously, I'm in the
Oh yeah.
audio business, so I have Spotify, I have YouTube Music, I have Tidal, I have Qobuz, I have Amazon HD. I've got all those.
Right.
And I have to follow, my streams and everything and see what's going on there. And of course, you're not, unless you're one of the top, dozen people, you're not making any money there.
Right.
So,
Right.
but the whole thing with vinyl coming back, it's like when it first started coming back, I go, oh man, this is like, people are nuts. Why would you bring this back? We've got this
Right.
high resolution streaming and this and that. And then of course we start to get the stuff and I'm starting to fool with it again. I'm going, oh my Lord. It's like, I probably have every version of Tarkus that you can think of. Okay. And I've got, the Steven Wilson remixes and the Stephen and the new vinyl and the old, but I'll tell you, all the streaming and everything all the CDs and the high res Blu-rays. And when I have an original vinyl of Tarkus, blows away all of them. It's crazy, but I don't know. It's like, it still baffles me how you can put this needle in this groove and get that kind of sound. Now it's different. Obviously it's not, maybe not as, what's the term, quite as crazy as like a high resolution recording because it has a different sound. But boy, when it's just amazing, that sound quality. Now, to say that, you can't get that if you have one of these, Crossley, $150 little, turntable things with the speakers built in. No. Obviously people who have those and are buying, $40 dollar records and putting them on that thing, it's like, putting the record on a lathe. But we can, I can talk high-end audio.
Well, I got this one recently, well, a month back.
Yeah, I've got it. Yeah,
And when I put on that the Blu-ray of it was like, it was almost like listening to the album for the first time.
Yeah.
At least for me, and
I have a 2-channel stereo system here with, high-end system. And then I also have a theater room. And I say probably I watch maybe 2 movies in there a year. But what I do watch in there is concerts. I have a huge collection of, of Blu-ray concerts and multi-channel music. I've got a 40-disc set of classical symphonic music from all the composers on 40 Blu-rays that are in 7.1 discrete, 2496 high-res audio. And it's like, holy, you just sit in that room and listen to that. It's amazing. And then of course I've got, all the Steven Wilson multi-channel mixes and stuff. I love that stuff. It's great.
Yeah, I think the ones right offhand that I got that I could point to is the 2 Jethro Tulls here. I got Stormwatch and then A.
Yeah.
Haven't had a chance to listen to it, but the DVDs on them, but it's like the packaging alone is so impressive, and to getting some of the the extra tracks that sometimes people unearth, that haven't seen the light of day since back in the day, and it's like, but my only thing is with these remasters is like, or remixes, it's like, it seems like almost every 5 or so years, a new one emerges, and and it's like, where do you stop? It's just the same with movies. It's like, I had VHS, then we upgraded to DVD. Okay, then we upgraded to Laserdisc. That's the one thing I never got, Laserdisc, because those were at the beginning, they were expensive.
Yeah.
So I went from VHS to DVD to Blu-ray, and then they have now the 4K, and it's like, where's it going to end? You know, I
Now,
know I heard in the horizon there's 8K and 10K coming out, and it's like, you know, what do you want to see up the person's nostril?
I
It's
mean,
like,
yeah, I mean, from what I'm hearing, they're going to skip 8K and go like right to 12. But the point of that is what's going to happen is obviously they can't even stream 8K. They don't even have the bandwidth at this point. And there's the only 8K content is what's provided by like Sony on a chip that that stores can, demo, or on a hard drive or something. But I mean, that's a whole nother world of, the
oh, I
picture.
know.
I mean, it's crazy. You think, how can it get any better? But it keeps getting better. But
Right.
as far as what's going to happen, I think eventually there's not going to be any more discs. I think it's all going to be streaming. I think they're just going to go away. I mean, if you look at the majority of the people, and I'm once again in the audio video business, I don't have many customers anymore that have a disc player in their system. It's all, Netflix and Vudu and Hulu and, all this, all streaming. They don't care about discs anymore. Right. And that's really the majority of the general public. Most people don't have a real surround system to enjoy, like, all this multi-channel music. They don't even, they either don't know it exists or don't care about it because, there's the high-end audio business is like about 10-11% of the market, maybe. The majority of people are fun, they'll just get, they get their TV and a little sound bar, and they have these little Amazon or Google speakers around the house that they listen to.
Right.
I mean,
right.
The majority of people are not into high-end audio, and it's
for me being in a, an apartment building, having that the full, surround setup, since I can't have it, I got the neck. For me, I like using headphones.
Sure.
Because it just right there, everything is right here. I'm not, and other reason is, I have a hearing issue, so everything I have to have the TV louder. I have to have the music louder, and not for the sake of it being loud. It's just I can't hear some of it. So having it on the headphones, that's my way of and music. I hear it so much better than if I unplug the headphone out of the, I'm watching it on the, listening to it on the computer. Plug it. It's like, it's like the sound just kind of escapes to an area, I can't hear it. Same with my my tablet. I listen to it. I have my own, headphones for the tablet. So it's like it's but I do appreciate the idea, and that's the one thing is I love to one day be in a situation where I can have a full surround system. I can watch and watch my favorite movies, listen to my favorite music in that setting where, I guess you would say is the most natural setting, but then you got the people that are opposite, that they all they do is listen to everything on their tablet or their phone,
right.
And it's like, and it completely, you lose the quality, and also, squinting to those tiny screens, it's like, I have an issue with, I have a phone, it's like I think it's like a 5-inch screen, and then my tablet is almost 11 inches, and it's like, and that's still too small, like, but you can't lug around a big TV everywhere you go, so you can't bring around your your stereo equipment everywhere, so it's like that's where it comes in handy. But if that's all you're relying on, it just
a lot of the younger people, because of have fortunately, because of the resurgence of vinyl, have gotten into better audio again. So they're, they want a little integrated amp, a decent pair of speakers and a turntable versus, the little Walkmans with the MP3, squashed music. But also now, obviously, those people who want to have, there's incredibly, great, services that are giving high res streaming music. And then there's all these little portable little DACs and I mean, there's headphones that are, ridiculously priced headphones out there that are just thousands of dollars. You can put together a headphone system, that's crazy, if you're really into it. So there's a lot of options out there. But once again, most of the people are just, listening to compressed music. But then again, you go, the streaming services now are starting to, which I am so happy you're waking up to higher resolution music. You've got finally Spotify is going to go to a higher resolution format. You've got Amazon HD, Tidal, Qobuz, and Deezer. They're it's so the streaming music is getting better and better and better. So it's the good thing about that is the sound quality. The bad thing about it is versus the discs, the musicians don't get paid. So,
Right. Yeah.
So,
I a friend of mine was talking about that a few months back, and I had just got a Spotify account, and I was thinking about at that time upgrading to their paid program thing. And then when he was telling me all this stuff, it's like, well, basically I'm gonna give my money to, basically that's going to that company, not going to the bands. And it's like, well, I just assume buy the CD, put it on my rip it to my computer and put it on here, and here's my portable music. I do have an Amazon HD account, only because whenever you buy a seems like almost every 2 CDs I buy, I get a notification. Oh, you got an MP3 of it. I'm like, oh, okay. That's the only reason why I use Amazon.
Amazon just made that free now. There's no extra charge if you're a Prime to get the HD.
Yeah, and I was like going, that's, and I use a lot of that streaming stuff. If someone recommends me the band, say, oh, you got to check out this band. That's what I use it for. And
it's great to find new stuff you've never heard of.
Oh yeah, and it's like, and stuff like I've been, I say a lot of times, it's things that I missed out.
Yeah.
The first time around, when back in the day when I really didn't care about music, before I was 14 years old, it didn't mean anything to me. And then 14, I really didn't start, music really didn't start affecting me until I was 20. And it was the passion of my childhood friend that he was like full into metal. That was his thing. So I'd go over to his house and he was playing different things, and it was like, okay, it sounds cool, but not. But then when he put on bands like Metallica, Megadeth, that style, that's when that music is like, okay, that clicked with me. The energy and I guess for the next 4 or 5 years after, that was 85, 86. So that's all I was listening to. And then when I told the story of working in the record store where the manager just totally he was getting like, okay, guys, can you play something different? And as I didn't know anything different, so he put on that King Crimson Red, and I was like, all of a sudden it's like the lights came on. It's like, okay, there it is. That's what I've been, honestly, that at that point was what I was looking for. I always wanted that kind of a sound. So it's like from then on, it's like, each year new recommendations and doors opening to different bands that I never heard of before, or I heard of them but never got into them.
Yeah.
So it's like, and then now, with Facebook, for the past 5-10 years, people recommending things, and I'm like going, you guys, I mean, my ears are thanking you, but my wallet is hating you.
Well, I've started listening to music, when I was born. My father was not a musician, but he was a music enthusiast. I mean, he loved, Broadway and big bands and, Ella Fitzgerald and, Frank Sinatra. I grew up there, and I grew up in the New York area. So, I mean, I was taking the Broadway shows. I got to see, Davy Jones play the Artful Dodger and Oliver. I saw Barbara Streisand and Funny Girl. I grew up surrounded by music. Plus, my great uncle was Abner Silver, and he was a very famous songwriter. He wrote songs for Al Jolson, Frank Sinatra. He wrote songs in GI Blues, Elvis Presley. He wrote this song called "With These Hands" that was recorded by Tom Jones, Shirley Bassey, The Temptations. I mean, it's so I grew up all around that music. We had a piano in my house since I was a kid. I started taking lessons, I think, when I can't remember, 5 or 6. So it's like it's always been there for me. So as far as like, my brother, is 4.5 years older than me. He was, basically the 50s. He was listening, to that rock stuff that was coming out in the 50s. And then of course, then the 60s came, and then of course it got more sophisticated, and, with the bands and the Beatles and the Zombies and the Stones, and it just kept on going and going and going. So
Right.
I've lived through, I grew up at the Fillmore East in New York. I mean, and I'm not a drug guy. So
Right.
I'm the straight guy. It's like
Right.
when I was in bands and everything, I might have gotten a couple contact highs, but I was the one who got everybody home. Okay. So,
Right.
but I mean, I saw everybody at the Fillmore. I used to go see Zappa, the late shows. It started at like, 11 o'clock at night, and didn't get out, walked out of the Fillmore and the sun was up.
Right.
I saw the original King Crimson, with Greg Lake and Giles and McDonald. I mean, I saw so much stuff. It was just like incredible, because I lived, it was like, I think the top ticket was maybe like $6 or $8 to see 3 acts. I saw,
Right.
I mean, so many people there. It was just amazing.
Yeah, you would probably appreciate and probably say it's like, it seems like from the 50s as it going up, music was getting more and more sophisticated into the 60s and the 70s.
Yeah.
And then it seemed like in the 80s it was like dropping.
Yeah.
At least in me, from what I hear.
Yeah.
The 90s it went a little bit more, because everything was going from sophistication to,
Yeah.
stripped down, the grunge era,
Yeah, the punk,
and then
whole punk scene that happened. And
I think the only musicians that in this day and age that are keeping up the sophistication is the progressive rock musicians, because all the mainstream music seems to be, it just basic sounds,
yeah.
I keep on watching different videos on YouTube about that, where, I forget, there was one where it's, the day pop music died or something like that. And it's like, just listening to all these, the newer bands of mainstream, I gotta say that it's the mainstream stuff, the stuff that, that would have been on MTV if MTV survived, stuff like that, those kind of bands, there's just nothing to it. I mean, I hear
But
it's like the same song over and over again with just different vocalists on it,
I swore to myself when I was young that I would never sound like my father, who used to say, how can you listen to that crap, and of course that crap at the time was like not crap. It was like, really melodic stuff, like, Beatles and stuff like that. So, And then of course, now it's like there's so many types of music out there, but of course the whole rap thing happened and this and that. And my son likes rap, my daughter doesn't, it's different things. But hey, I'll never say to them, I swore that I would never be like my dad to my kids.
Right. Yeah, that's the one thing. That's the one thing that you know, our generation and is that we don't sound like our parents. We don't
I mean,
sound like our dad. I mean, if anything, it's like it's just the weirdest thing. When I
I mean,
turned 50, I was like, I remember when my dad turned 50, and two different. It's like I didn't look at it.
yeah,
So
I
it's
mean,
like I
Amer-
certainly didn't feel it.
yeah, American music, rock and roll grew out of, black music and rhythm and, blues and jazz and all that. English music to me grew out of classics, out of the classical, music. Then, it's where you had the Moody Blues and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and, and even, if you listen to early Deep Purple, I mean, don't get, John Lord, most people, he, if you didn't understand really how incredible John Lord was,
Right.
that he was a classical composer. I mean, all those, all the early string parts you heard, it's like the whole Deep Purple and orchestra that was, way back. He was, them and the Nice were the first two bands that did a rock thing with an orchestra. And what John Lord actually wrote and scored all those parts. I mean, he wrote symphonies. I mean, he was like amazing. And that's sort of like, to me, that's where more of the British stuff came from. And of course, then the rock and roll from over here, influenced a lot of, the English over there. Is
Right.
Beatles were obviously Stones and things like that. So it all sort of started to mesh together, between the two worlds, and it's been interesting.
Oh yeah. It's like my thing is that the music today is no one's experimenting. They're just settling for what's there and just not thinking outside the box. And it's like, and it's always cool when any of the progressive rock bands, when they start they're utilizing what's going around now and then creating something better. It's just the same as back in the late 60s, early 70s, when progressive rock bands were taking what was going around musically and then injecting that experimentation, creating something better, for the most part. I mean, there's some stuff that, you listen to and you can't believe that someone actually spent money to put it onto tape, it's like.
Also, the sad thing is, people are getting older, and we're losing people, I mean, that was the first or second cruise to the edge. Alan Holdsworth was on the ship, and I'm having a beer with him, and then within a year later, he's gone. I mean, you talk about somebody who is, had a style like nobody else,
Oh, I know. It's like,
it's and hopefully, I think there's enough. I think there's enough younger people who have gotten into that, into fusion and prog and stuff that will carry, this type of music on. Younger bands like Evership and different, and I love Big Train and.
oh yeah, that's who Everchip is, the one is having 2 albums put out this year.
Yeah.
I think the first part is in a few weeks, and then the second part is later on in the year. So it's like, it's getting back to that, where bands were ambitious, putting out more music than, and then of course with the digital format and then now streaming format, the streaming for, this is one thing I was talking about with someone that I didn't, when the band just puts out streaming only, Now, is that thing that they're putting out, is that still an album or a collection of songs? You know, because, you know, we have, you know, back in the day when there were records and tapes where you, what was it, 20 something minutes on each side. So you were limited to that amount, and then CD
Right.
are limited to 79-ish minutes, you know.
Yeah.
But with the streaming, it's unlimited, you know. I mean, if you wanted to put out a 7-hour album, you
Yeah,
could.
You could, yeah.
And it's still, you know, still by the, I guess by the industry standards, it's still an album. But
Yeah.
but if it's only being released on digital format, I don't. For me, I don't think it's no longer a traditional album.
Well, no, it's no, things have changed. You know, there's a book out there. It's called, somebody moved the cheese, and it's like, you've got to, I mean, you can't stay in the past. Unfortunately, I mean, it's like a lot of bands can't afford, to make the actual physical product. I
Right.
mean, and label, it's not like the old days of a record label. The old days of a record label is you got signed to a label. Okay, they gave you money up front. They actually, you know, believed in you in the old days, because if, like today, if you were, like later on, if you were signed to an album and your first album didn't happen, you were gone. They would just sign bands and bands and like throw it up on the wall like spaghetti and see which one stuck. The old, like Yes, take Yes for example. I don't think they broke until their fourth album, until people started to really get into them. That
Right.
doesn't happen anymore. It's like, it's everything's got to be, boom, 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 make me money now kind of a thing.
Right. Yeah.
But
That's
the label would put up a lot of money up front. They put the band in the studio. They'd hire a producer. You had manager. I mean, it's like, I've been through this all. That signed to multiple labels and stuff through my career. And then of course they would make the records and they would put them out there. Guess what money you got? You got nothing until you paid back everything that they spent. So, you had to pay back the recording costs, everything before you saw a nickel. So now actually the band has an opportunity, because of places like Bandcamp and CD Baby, where if you can put out a product, you can actually make money, because I've got, you can record now at home.
Yeah.
With these new recording devices as good as you could in the old, better than, a multi-million-dollar studio in the old days. So it's really crazy now. Like, for example, I've got one of my albums is on vinyl, that I was able to put on vinyl. I wanted to put the piano album out on vinyl, but I couldn't. It's like, what's going on in the pricing, I couldn't afford it. I couldn't do it, because my label deal is a distribution deal. So they get my music out there on all the services and all around the world and all that stuff, but they don't make my product.
right.
So, I have to have that made and get it out there. Like, you go to, roby1.bandcamp.com and you get all my stuff. And a lot of, I still also, I give I do a lot of promotions, like on my last couple albums, I gave half of everything I got to the Bob Moog Foundation of my profits. So, it's crazy. To get a living out there, that's why I still have a regular job.
Right. That's what there's a lot of the bands that I've spoke to and I've known, since the 90s,
Mhm.
that, like one band in particular, and they were upfront and honest with everybody, their fans, is IQ. They said, we are a part-time band.
Yeah.
We couldn't make the money off of that kind of product. This
Yeah.
is just, it's kind of more like a labor of love
Yeah.
feeling to it, and it's like, and it's a shame, it's a shame that, bands that have all this, musicians that have all this talent, and then you got these people that, they have someone program noises for them and they sing over it, and
Yeah.
then they have their voices auto-tuned, to sound like this perfect robots, and it's like, uh,
Yeah.
that's why I like listening to people that, their voices, with the exception of, some effects, but their voices are natural and it comes out it warts and all, and it's like, and just the same with, with the musicians in the, the 60s and 70s. You made a mistake on it, it's there forever, you know. I one time I heard this one guy, he was on a local radio show in Los Angeles, talking about some of Eddie Van Halen's guitar playing. Now, they said if you would go in and nitpick it, you would find so many mistakes. But it's those mistakes that's what makes the song.
It's all about the feeling. To me, if you do everything on the computer, you can do it. Yeah, you can do it where it's still has the feel if you don't overdo it. But if you start really overdoing it and fixing this and changing that and moving this here and there and patching this here and there, to me, it becomes sterile and it loses that feeling. So that's sort of, but that's how I grew up. It's sort of old school. So it's just like in the old day, the story of, Keith Emerson doing the big, Lucky Man solo at the end, that he wanted to try it again. And he said, and they're all going, no, 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 because if he would have done it again, they didn't have enough room. They would have recorded over the one he did. So.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, back then you go, oh, don't we wish that we had be able to do it, keep on, perfecting that part. And now we look back, it's like, that maybe I'm glad we didn't. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. I mean, you look at all the old Beatles stuff was on 4-track, now it's like, I don't know how many tracks you could get digitally. I don't even know. But, I usually don't do more than, 5 or 6 tracks on my stuff, because it just gets too much if you overdo it. But
oh yeah, that's the one thing. That's the one thing I noticed with, bands when they started, adding and keep on going more and more. How are they going to reproduce that in a live setting?
Yeah.
I mean, one of my favorite all-time albums, Pet Sounds. You listen to that, you're going to need a lot of people on that stage to really reproduce it,
Yeah.
properly. And it's like, it's the same as like when the Beatles, you got 4 guys, but then in the early days, it sounded like 4 guys. But as it got towards the end of the 60s, it sounded like there was 20 guys sometimes, going. And it's like, and there probably were 20 guys going on, it's just like, I think the limitations of, it's like, okay, 4 guys, keep it to where it's going to sound like 4 guys.
Yeah.
At least, that's my opinion. I like to be able to, if I'm going to go see a band, that has one guitar player and then he does a lot of overdubs in the studio, and it's like, well, you're gonna have to get a second guitar player, and then it just kind of, for me, kind of ruins the whole thing of, especially when they go, power trio. It's like, whether it's a guitar, bass, drums, or bass, drums, keyboards, whatever the format, as long as you kind of stay within that. But then,
well, I have an advantage, I guess. Electronic keyboards can do so much, stuff. I mean, I have every sound on the planet at my fingertips, kind of a thing. And playing live, obviously I don't have all, this whole setup, but I can, I basically have, a looper, and I can set up loops, so that I can play over live, something like. So I can, like drum stuff, or I can, do things like that. And then I can just, play stuff on top of that. So I can, it's real easy.
Oh, yeah. Oh yeah, in that sense, yeah, that's perfect. I remember was it one year that I saw it was Eric Norlander.
Yeah.
I saw him, and then all the before that, it's like I never knew all what the noises the keyboards can do other than its traditional sounds. And it's like, and the things that it would, especially when he came out a couple of times when he did with his band, the Rocket Scientists. But then when he came out, I think it was one year I saw it where he came out with his, that famous Wall of Doom that he had.
Yeah.
And so it's like all that those noises that he can do, and like what you just did is like it amazes me. But it's like when people go to the next step where they just press one button and then the whole thing goes. They're not using here anymore. They're just using preset things. You'll have a manual saying you got to do.
I try to do like a minimalist background like track, where it's not everything. I mean, I want to be able to I'm still playing, like I'm getting together once, trying to get stuff together for the next, for Prague Stock and for Rosfest and everything, and started recording. I have one track done for my next record, kind of a thing too. But yeah, it's I don't like, I've seen solo performances where there was like the whole band was playing off of a computer thing, and then they were just doing one little part on top of it.
Right.
I'll try to do a lot, more, basic background stuff, and then have to actually do a little work.
Right. Yeah. It's amazing. You got the drum sounds there. So it's like if for some reason you can't get a drummer, you got it right there.
I miss playing a lot with other people, with bands, having a band and stuff like that. It'd be really great to do that again. Obviously, I've done it through the internet. Playing on records. I played with Joe Macri on Joe's American Garage album, and the Tony Romero's Vortex. It was all done over the internet. They send me stuff, I'll play on it, I send it back, but it's still not, it's still not the same,
Right.
It's all, being there type of a thing. That's why, the Mogan, the Park thing at Prague Stock, when all the other musicians were coming up, we were jamming. That was a blast to be able to do that. Especially when, Eric, I met Eric a few years back. He played Atlanta. His manager, Sandy, hired a hall down there. Me and my wife went down there. It was just like, I don't know, maybe a dozen people in this hall to see Eric and his band. And I met him there. And then, of course, I met him, at Prague Stock, when Rocket Scientists did their final gig there.
Right.
That was great. And I'm really excited about that. Lana is doing a new album.
Oh yeah, and she's going to be kind of basically label mates with our mutual friend Robert Berry.
Yeah.
So that label seems to be like the label for that style of music.
Yeah. Well, it was great. Robert. I saw the original 3 in Atlanta. when they toured. And of course, when they, you know, when the whole 3.2 thing came together and they came to Prague Stock, because I already been, you know, friends with Andrew Collier, who became their keyboard player and Circuline and all that stuff. So, you know, it was amazing at Prague Stock. And then after Prague Stock, they actually, on their tour run, they played Asheville. So I went up to Asheville and I actually played, you know, crew that day. And I helped them load and stuff and all that stuff. And Andre was the opening act, you know, with his little, you know, keyboard and guitar thing that he was doing. And we had a blast. So we became, you know, really, really good, you know, friends and everything.
Oh yeah, yeah.
He's a wonderful guy, great guy.
He's that rare type of person where you meet him for the first time and you swear you've known him for decades.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I had that vibe just doing the Zoom thing with him. It was like I felt like I'd known him for decades, and you know,
Yeah.
and I just met him. You know, followed his music for since the '90s.
Oh yeah.
I did have, you know, like I told him, I did have the first three album on cassette, and
Mhm.
just for me, for me personally, it was just wrong timing because I was listening to that heavier stuff, and just for some reason, I knew who Keith Emerson and Carl Palmer were, not only ELP but you know, Asia for Carl, and you know, so it's like I was like going, okay, here's something new. I was like, okay, it just for me it just didn't fit in with the rest of the
Right.
music that I was listening to it.
Well, yeah, I
But
mean,
it,
I was a big ELP fan. Plus, I have like a whole section in my CD, you know, collection of all the Magna Carta stuff that he was
right,
involved with, and so you know, I was, it was like, it was great. You know, anything that kept anything with Emerson going was in my book. So
right, you know, and it wasn't until later that you know, that I fully appreciated, and that's one of the things that you know I always talk about is the people with music tunnel vision, where they only listen to one thing, and because I fell into that thing twice, and you know, in my life I fell into that category, and after the second time I said never again. I I I mean I've listened to just about every kind of music that's been out there. Some of it, you know, I'm not interested in listening to again. You know, country music and rap music. I listened to it. It didn't hit me in the same impact as
yeah,
rock and jazz and blues.
oh, yeah,
It,
everybody gets moved by different things, you know.
yeah,
But
and
it's, I mean, I love female vocalists. I mean, I mean, people like Mary Fowle and Lori Lieberman, who I've become, you know, friends with through the years. Um, wow. I mean, those kind of voices. And I just, you know, I put on my stereo. I mean, I listen to a lot of female vocalists. I was a huge Kate Bush fan, you know,
oh yeah,
is well, but, there's I like a lot of, you know, folk and ethnic music that I listen to, and a lot of Celtic music. Lorena McKennitt, oh my God, it's
yeah,
one of the greatest concerts I've ever seen in my life was her. Uh,
yeah. I've seen a couple of clips of her different, you know, the shows over the years, and it's like it's kind of more of kind of, in a way, kind of like an experience where
but
you
I mean, that her voice is just like holy moly.
oh yeah. Uh, I had when I first heard her song "Murmurs Dance," I was like, oh wow. I was like, this is it's like
Mhm.
so angelic sounding that is.
And I, you know, growing up, that I loved Matty Pryor, Steel Eye Span, and all that stuff. So I mean, I was listening to, you know, I got into Iona. Um,
Yes.
you know, which David Bainbridge is in that band. And then of course he's in Life Signs and all that stuff. So when he Life Signs was on Cruise to the Edge, it was like, holy crap, David Bainbridge is like, to me, his guitar work and his keyboard work, he's just, fantastic. So we were out, where you have to come out at the beginning of the cruise and line up and do your, all that kind of vest stuff and everything. So I walked up to him and I introduced myself. I have to, said, I don't know how you remember between Iona and you're in the Straubs and live, how you remember all that stuff. And he goes, oh, I know you. He goes, you're the guy who does those videos on Facebook with all the keyboards. He actually knew who I was. I was like completely blown away. And of course now, we're in that thing with him, and I became, friends with him. And of course they put, he played Prague stock, and it was like, holy, it was great. It was like I was blown away. They actually like knew who I was from.
Right. Yeah, that's always like it's kind of amazing when your heroes, your musical heroes know who you are. It's usually it's like the other way around, and that's why, with doing these shows that I've done so far is like, are everybody that, through Facebook and also and beyond, that I've been friends with.
Yeah, getting to know Jordan Rudess. It was like, because of we had the same music attorney, I was able to go to the Dream Theater shows and get after show stuff, right?
Right.
So I started, one of the shows, I think here in Charlotte, I went backstage. I had this Tarkus thing on, and of course his keyboard tech is Keith, who was Keith Emerson's keyboard tech as well. He introduced me to him. We started talking, and I met him other times. And of course, on our cruise to the edge, got to hang out a lot with him and stuff, because he knew who I was at that point, and my music and stuff. So it was like, it's really cool. Be able to get to know
that's the one thing, that I never really got into is playing an instrument, mostly because I'm very impatient when it comes to things. So I just said, okay, well, I don't have the time to do that. So I'm going to do the next best thing and appreciate what those musicians put out.
Yeah.
Listen to, and learn about their why they do it, how they do it, and to me it's more, for music, I'm more invested into it, where I just need to know all the ins and outs of it, even if some of the stuff I don't understand. It's like, I kind of need to know. um, like I just said previous, with the keyboards, all that stuff, before, when I first got into music, I knew what the basic keyboard sounds were. I couldn't tell you what equipment anybody uses. I've had friends that they're like, it's like they totally nerd out, talking about all these different equipment. I got a friend of mine from back home that he is like this massive keyboard fan, and I think he knows just about every keyboard, everything that has to do with it, and he's telling me, oh, you should get this because it has all that. And I go, just tell me if I should get it or not. I don't know the details, And then now, of course, you can send, examples of the things. Whereas back when we first met, we had email, but it was before, YouTube and stuff like that. So it's like, only way you can do it is if someone rips their music onto their computer and then sends you, a file of it. But it's like, and so just to do that would take like, most of your day just to get one song ripped up onto your computer. And now it's like within seconds, it's up there. So it's like, but he's like anything that has to do with keyboards, where especially if it's in an electronic setting, like one of the bands that recently that he's been into a lot is Zombie. I'm not sure if you heard of them.
I think so.
They obviously they took the name off of the George Romero, the Italian title of is Dawn of the Dead,
Right.
Zombie, and they kind of do that kind of a like the goblin sound,
Right. Well, I like
and
God.
yeah, and it's like they're really a really good band. Um they were originally a two-piece, but then they added a third person in.
Mhm.
Uh, it was just primarily keyboards and drums before. Now they've got the guitar sounds going in there, so it's like it takes it to a different level. They're one of those bands, and so when he talks about that, or when John Carpenter put out his CDs, um, that kind of music he's
Yeah.
really into, and so he's like my if I hear of a band that does or someone that's doing primarily keyboards, I'd say, hey,
Mhm.
just like I told him, uh, I messaged him about a week ago and told him that I was going to be talking with you, and that I talked with Lisa Belladonna,
Yeah.
and
Right.
and,
Yeah.
and he's like he goes, he said, yeah, he says, I heard the name Lisa Belladonna. And I said, well, you're on the online. Go to YouTube,
Mhm.
and listen to it. I think it's something you're gonna like. You know,
Yeah, I got yeah, we got to talk. I met her at the Museum grand opening, and she was one of the performers that weekend. It was, yeah, she was really cool.
yeah, it's like, and that's one thing I noticed that I think you got two kinds of, in the prog, you have two kinds of keyboards. You got the ones that are the ultra flashy, and the other ones that, they have the nice textures, and it's like it takes um it's almost like they're painting a canvas where sometimes those ultra fast keyboard, it's I think in the same realm as those you know guitars that play like a million notes per second. It's like I just don't get that. you know I mean, it's nice to be flashy, but it's
Mhm.
like it's
It's,
like you
I love, doing some, flashy, fast riffs and stuff, but it's got to be, it just can't be all the time. It's got to be where it fits.
exactly, yeah. That's the basic thing, with keyboards and with guitars. You know it does. That could be so tiresome. Well, it became tiresome for me. Growing up with the heavy guitars. It's like, yeah, it's like, okay, that's nice that you can do that, but can you put some feeling into it? Now that would be a great thing to see if someone can combine that fast playing with some feeling in it, and a lot of the guitar players can't, because it's like it's either one or the other.
I think,
And
I think one of my favorite guitar players who was able to do that is Steve Vai.
oh yeah, I mean,
He he can do the speed stuff, but boy, he can be so, tasty. Get those like him and Jeff Beck when they do those bends and those beautiful like great phrasing things, it just blows me away. Of course, John Petrucci can, from Dream Theater, you know, he does a lot of, they do obviously a lot of the fast stuff, but when he wants to and calm down and he can do his pretty stuff, it's really it's quite
right,
well.
yeah, because like you're saying, Steve Vai. When I first heard of him, I this is before I found out, that he was with, Frank Zappa. But, you know, my first exposure to Steve Vai is with David Lee Roth,
Mhm.
you know, where he, at the time, all I heard is people saying, "Oh, David Lee Roth got a Eddie Van Halen's clone," and I'm like going. Once I heard Steve Vai, I go, I love Eddie's playing, but they're in
Yeah.
two different.
Yeah.
They're in two different planets. It's like they're so different. I mean, yeah, they kind of cross paths, but that's all they're doing is crossing paths. They're not in the same. And that's what I didn't. I understood why, but when he got hooked up with Whitesnake, I'm like going, that's
Hmm.
he was too
Yeah.
good for that. He was just too good for that.
Richie,
That's just my opinion.
Richie Blackmore's another one who was really tasteful in his playing, and in the classic Deep Purple stuff. He did some great stuff. Another one. I've got my keyboard collection here too is very eclectic. I've got a real good combination of old and new here. I've got some classic stuff. I've got the Moog. I've got a Hammond organ. I've got Mellotron. And new and older. I've got a Kurtzwell K2000 that was like used on a lot of the original Pink Floyd stuff, and so I've got a good combination. I've got a Lisa's keyboard here that actually Eric Norlander, the quadrisynth, had a lot to do with the creation of that and the sounds in there. So it's I'm a collector, but I don't have any room for anything else in here right now. The only keyboard that every day I go through a memory of crying is that I had to sell. I had a Yamaha CS80. I don't know if you're familiar with what that is, but that's what Blade Runner, Vangelis and Toto used, and Eddie Jobson on UK. I mean, it was like this 250-pound gorilla Yamaha keyboard. It was amazing, and I had to sell it. And I just would love to have that thing back one of those
right.
days.
But where would you put it, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I have like, when I was gonna do, obviously I started learning how to play piano, and that last, my Piano Stories album, I was looking for a new piano, because I have a little spinet in here you can't even see. It's covered up. It's got a keyboard sitting on it. I don't use it, but I was shocked. People give away pianos all the time. You look on Craigslist and all this stuff, and so these people just wanted out of their house. So anyway, they had this. I went around and played a couple, and they were just, I didn't have, I can't buy a new, $100,000 Steinway or $20,000, stuff like that. So I'm looking, for a used piano in somebody's house. And I played a couple, and they were messed up, and they, you sure you don't want it? No. And I found this one piano, and it's like, it's 100 years old. It was built in upstate New York, and I'm friends with Dutch Atkins. I met him through Facebook, and he's the piano tuner locally here that does all the Steinway piano tuning and stuff. And anyway, they wanted $1,000 for it. I talked them down to like $800 for this beautiful old piano. Had it moved to my house, had him tune it up, and I looked on the internet and I found that piano, and like rebuilt versions of that are going for like $35,000.
Wow.
Like, so anyway, I got it all tuned up, and I said, I want to go back to my roots. So that's where I just took this Zoom microphone, which is actually I have the one that does video, but it's it's just a little thing like this here. I don't know if you can see it.
Right.
It records in 24, 96 high res on a little SD card. And I sat it inside the piano, and I just played these, some things like I had like a little prearranged, and some of it was just made up on the spot kind of stuff. And I just put together these 9 pieces of music, and basically I took the chip, the little SD card out of that thing into a little adapter straight to the computer. That's it. Never touched the board. It never touched an EQ. It never touched any effects or nothing. And just made that record. It was like, okay, there it is. It's a, to me, it's like, I mean, on my system, the piano recording sounds incredible. It's like you're right there with it. It's a really nice recording. But it's done. It's got better than I thought. Actually, one of the Piano Story #5 has been picked for a movie, which I'm excited about. Hopefully, will be out by the end of the year, called Dead Man's Bucket List, with Char Leonard and Sam Elliott. So, and I didn't want to give the songs like names because I really wanted the people just listen to the music and sort of feel or bring back whatever they wanted to into it. So that's why it's just story 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, kind of a thing. So I mean, it was a little scary to to do, because you can't hide behind all being able to do all this fancy electronic stuff, because there's electronic music out there that, I mean, there's people who put out albums that actually have all these keyboards, but they don't actually ever press a key. They just basically set up patterns and turn knobs. So it's like, so I am, and I'm the opposite. I want to play and everything, and there's nothing wrong with what I just said. It's just different. So.
Well, you like to be creative.
Yeah, but I'm like sticking my neck out there. Okay, I'm just like, I'm not Jordan Rudess, I mean, I bet he's like, or Rachel Flowers, who is wonderful, pianist and whatever, whatever she, all her instruments that she plays. But I think I was really happy with it. Now I'm gonna probably do another, I'm working on another, back to the synthesizer album again for the next one. But it was definitely a challenge, and sticking my neck out there a little bit, just piano,
Right. Well, someone was saying, who was years ago, when you just go out there with just your instrument, nothing back, kind of like, I guess in a way you would call it naked. You don't have anything else that's supporting you, that could be scary, but then at the same time, it could be, you have that that excitement of, okay, I'm gonna do something, maybe out of my element in a way, so it's like that. It's nice when musicians do that, when they just put out the same kind of album over and over again, whether it's instrumental or has vocals on it. If it just follows the same pattern, they're not doing anything different album to album.
It's like the new Saga album. They went acoustic, so it's like, things like, you've got to take some chances and do some things different. It's just like, poor Steven Wilson, the stuff that he, that people get on him about, because they're, he's trying to reach out and do new things, and, and he got a lot of, people all upset with his, Future Bites album.
Oh yeah, that's the one thing. I haven't had a chance to get it, but I'm here. I just hear all these people. It's like from, and it just kind of goes back to my early days. You remember that they're still around, that website Prog Years.
Yeah.
Where it's like everybody. It's like if you deviate out of the progressive rock, world, it's like, you look down upon, and it's like, and I've seen some of those types of people that are reacting to, Stephen Wilson's new album, and I'm like going, if you don't like it, you don't like it. That's not, I think a lot of musicians, progressive rock musicians, mostly, I think they put out the music, and they can't please every single person out there, And again, it's like with Stephen Wilson, it's like they want him to do the same progressive rock album over and over again.
They want Porcupine Tree back again.
I mean, well, that would be nice, but it's like,
That's that's gone.
it's
You know,
just, it's got, he did it. It's like how that old phrase, been there, done that.
and I think the new record's brilliant. I mean, I've got the the vinyl. I bought like the set and the multi-channel Blu-ray in my theater is just like, oh, it's phenomenal. He's got that down, boy. He is so good at doing that stuff. It's just great. But
Right. And it's like, and in some places, some guys still kind of, his name is like almost like a bad word. And I'm like going, it's like he's doing something different. He's not staying, he's not staying still,
yeah,
lack of a better phrase, he's not staying still. He's doing different things. And
yeah.
if he's successful at it, fantastic. And if he sees that what he's doing now just didn't pan out the way he wants to, he'll go on to something else.
Oh, the album's been, I think, very successful.
Yeah. But it's like, but he's probably the kind of guy that if he's successful, he'll probably do something completely different on the
Yeah.
next album,
Yeah. Yep.
It's like, I mean, he's in that position where he can do it. He's that a rare position that he's able to get, if he puts it out, and if for some reason it didn't do as well as he wanted, he just goes on to the next thing. That's I do plan on getting it. It's just that, just when you think about it, and then next thing you know, something else. Someone else recommends something else that clicks almost instantly. I think with his new album, Future Bites. I think that's it. From the way I'm hearing it, it sounds like it's one of those very, even though on the outside it sounds simple, but it's very complex once you get into it.
Yes.
Oh,
I mean, he's one of the people on top of my list. So if he's got something, I mean, I've got the pre-order in like the day that I can put a pre-order in. So it's
right.
kind of a person. So.
Oh yeah, there's quite a few bands that I've done, the pre-orders for. Others that I wait till it comes out and I can listen to it.
Yep.
But I wanted to add this one thing. You mentioned it earlier about working with other people, doing a group type of a thing. Have you considered doing something like that with, now with all these people that, this past year, we got a little, even though everybody's in different parts of the world, we got a little closer with the Zoom.
Right.
Well,
as far as putting together a live band, is that you asking again?
Yeah, like a live band, or even going into the studio and doing a band.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, nobody's asked me at this point yet. I mean, I've got Steve Benino, who's a great singer and songwriter. He did most of the vocals on the Tony Romero's Vortex album. He's been after me to do a solo piece on one of his songs, which I got to get done this week for him before he finds me and smacks me.
Right.
But it's like I talked about, we should get together and do that album live, and of course, that's probably not going to happen. But I don't know. I mean, I'd love to do something, but I don't know. I don't anything in particular I can think of right now that would come together to form that.
Yeah, so who knows? Maybe someone will see this when it gets onto YouTube. 'Cause it's or any I guess, how do they say, anything can happen.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. People have through Prague Stock, and now this will be actually my first Ross Fest that I'll be involved with. I've never gotten to go before. It always interfered with work. So finally getting out there at 70 years old is pretty funny. So
yeah, it reminded me of the early prog fest out in Los Angeles, where the bands that they put out maybe an album or two in the 70s, and then they've been dormant
yeah,
the 80s, and then like almost maybe sometimes almost two decades, and
yeah.
then someone brings them back, pulls them back into the
It's
music.
it's like nectar coming back, the same thing.
Yeah, all these, it's just amazing, all these bands that these festivals here, especially in the United States,
Mhm.
that they bring them out of their musical retirement,
Mhm.
because like you said, you got day jobs,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's like, like you said, you get these over on your Bandcamp.
Yeah. Robeone, ROBEONE.bandcamp.com.
I'll put that link down below so people can go over there, and that's
Yeah. Look, my music is, on every streaming service out there all over the world, that you can listen to it. It's in the new piano album, the Piano Stories, is in high res on Qobuz and on Amazon HD. And otherwise it's on all services. My label, Transglobal, through the Orchard puts all the songs on YouTube, so it's like, I'd love you to buy it, obviously.
oh yeah,
But if you just listen, if you listen to it and like it, just put it on repeat, turn the volume down. After 15,000 streams, I can get 5 cents. But it all adds up.
right.
It's like I was talking to John Young on Cruise to the Edge.
Yeah.
The keyboard player from Life Science, and he's dead against streaming. I mean, he's got a few things out now, a couple things, but he doesn't. He's dead against putting his music out there. And I just said, well, look, I get a little money from it, not much, but it's like I'm an unknown, artist, really. It's like, even, it gets you out there where,
Right.
So I don't know how to, I couldn't avoid it, but there's other people who don't want to have anything to do with it. So, and they don't. And,
Oh yeah, I remember him saying that.
And they're able to finance putting their record out because they have a name already, and they get people to put up pre-order and get the money so they can make the record and stuff like that. I can't do that.
Right.
So it's like, who's this guy asking for money for what, for a record?
Right.
So
Yeah, I actually, when I first started my website prognaut.com, he was one of about a year or two into it, he was one of the first ones that sent me a bunch of stuff, at the time where I was getting a lot of unsolicited music.
Yeah.
And he sent me stuff, and I remember, like, he was, that he would, when everybody was getting into the streaming thing, he was dead against it. He said, I'll send you the CD, because everybody was into sending. It was more towards the 2010 is when almost all the labels, they stopped sending you the little like Inside Out Music.
Right.
They would send stuff in in the cardboard sleeves, and then all of a sudden it's no longer the cardboard sleeves, they're sending you these high resolution thing, and it's like, to me, it's like, oh, it's like that's gonna pile up if I had too many people sending me
Right.
digital versions of it. It's like, I'm not going to be able to keep track. Now, if I
Yeah.
had a stack of CDs, then I go, okay, it's like, now I know what my homework is. I got it right here. Virtually, it was just gonna be too confusing for me. So, I turned down a lot of stuff to get, and, sometimes I kind of regretted doing that, but then I was like, I wouldn't have been able to kept up with all that, and I understand why some people do send it out digitally, is because, it gets expensive to send out promos,
Yeah.
you know. Um, so, I understand on both sides, and I tell people, I said, okay,
Yeah.
I had, then, like I was talking to Dave and Sharon the other night, um, about that, getting those, the digital format is like, it's nice, but I like to go just as soon rather purchase the CD, because then I'm not obligated really to, talk about it. I'm more obligated when someone sends me things. And I said, and plus also, if I can afford to, I'd rather um, buy your product than you're giving it. And they said, yeah, that makes sense. And it's like, but everybody, I think nowadays when it comes to digital, is people don't have, like myself, don't have the room for a
Yeah.
lot of stuff, because as you can see, I got stuff now stacked this way,
Uh-huh.
you
Well,
know.
I've got a closet just stuffed, and then I have a second bedroom that's got all my albums, and I have my main room, I have a theater. I mean, I've got software like all over the place. And I have like the most understanding, wonderful wife on the planet, because I have my whole house is, every room is like, high-end audio systems, and then I have like this is one of the bedrooms here in the house. So it's like it's I'm a lucky guy.
It's nice when that happens. It really is. I mean, um, my girlfriend and I, when it comes to music, we do have some similarities, but it's mostly, it's on opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
You had mentioned one of the bands that she really likes is Nightwish. So
Yeah.
she's when I told her about that and I played her music, she just fell in love with that kind of music. So
Yeah.
loves that kind of music.
I mean, yeah, when I first met my wife, uh, was in her car and looking at her CD collection. Uh, it was Neil Young, it was Nudie Blues, King Crimson, Yes, and Emerson Lake and Palmer. Do I have to say more?
Right. You got. I mean, you're the lucky one in the whole thing. I always love listening to the guys on Facebook talk about, oh, my wife's upset because I spent $300 on prog CDs.
Mhm.
It's like, yeah,
Yeah, I hear you.
So basically, you got these are the four you have out now.
There's actually one more that I didn't send you that I didn't put in there, which is actually my first solo album. So there's one more out there. It's called Keep the Music Flowing. Actually, I don't know if you can see in the picture, this photograph behind me up there was done by a wonderful artist. That's the cover. The other covers that you have, those are photographs of stuff that I did myself. But
Oh yeah, I think this is one of the cooler ones. All the keyboards.
yeah, that's all my keyboards. Yeah.
If someone couldn't figure out what instrument you're playing on, then they got there's something wrong with them. It's like I mean, that's like the biggest, you know, you don't have to say, well, what does he play?
Who was he playing?
Right there.
Uh,
All right. Well, you know, first of all, thank you for being, you know, I think you've been in the audience for all of the shows that I've done so far.
I try to catch him. Yeah, when I can.
And I appreciate that. And also I appreciate that you took the time to do this, you know, to get your music out this way too. You know, I say it time and time again that, you know, this is one of the big reasons for me doing this is
Mhm.
to get the music out there. You know, it's out there with the streaming, but it's like, I think something on this format where you're getting, you know, the one-on-one with the with your audience, I think it, you know, takes it a little bit further. You can get to know more about them, you know, and I also like this format of where it's not a traditional question answer thing. I personally find those boring.
Well, you know, as I said, I've been around a long time. You know, I've recorded with a lot of people. You know, people have actually heard me in the background of, you know, people like Johnny Nash and stuff like that. But you know, I really appreciate you having me on. You know, because you have, you know, people who are mostly, you know, known people on there. So give me a shot to get
Oh,
a
no
little
problem. You know,
about stuff. I mean, believe me, I've got, you know, stories of a lot of musical industry stories that we should probably talk about on the side before I talk about live.
right. Yeah, you don't want to get in trouble, right?
I could get a lot of people in a lot of trouble. I've, yeah, seen a lot of stuff. But yeah, I was like, oh, well, I could probably say this, you probably wouldn't care, but when I was running, you know, managing Electric Lady Studios, you know, Keith Richards would come down, and a couple of times we had to carry him, you know, up the stairs out to his limo and stuff. But he's, you know, he's not like that anymore, from what I understand. And you know, but I've seen some crazy stuff.
I can imagine. You know, I haven't seen that much, but you know what I've seen.
Yeah, the Clash, when they were recording Combat Rock, they had like 14-year-old naked girls laying around the studio that came in off the street and stuff down in the village.
Oh God.
Yeah, I can go on for hours with that kind of stuff.
Right. Oh, we could maybe do another one of these sometime. You know.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah,
All right.
sure. Yeah. I can do live stuff too if you want. You know, if you want me to, you know, play live on the show and stuff like that too.
Yeah,
So,
we could do something like that down the line. That would be perfect. You know, get some people interested in,
mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
seeing some live. A precursor.
All righty, that's great.
Right. Well, thank you again, Robert. I really do
Thank you so much,
appreciate it.
Ron. Appreciate it.
And I'll talk with you soon.
Okay, we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Okay. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye bye.